Thank you. Okay, the rest of not B. B is all physiology of the eye. We will revisit this in physio. So I mean, I'm just scrolling through it to make sure that that's what it is. So we do. I mean, it's really this is a physiology chapter for next semester. Okay, we get to the nose. Okay. So let's do this, and then so B and C, it really doesn't taste very long because they're the same. Okay, where photoreceptors are very complicated when we do physiology. These are not so complicated. These are chemical receptors. I mean, there's not a lot of anatomy here. We did the anatomy of the eye, which is complex. The ear anatomy is complex. We'll get to that today. After that, we'll start the heart. Because maybe, I don't know, I'm toying with the idea of, is everybody going to be here on Monday? I'm toying with the idea of dissecting the heart then, too. You good with that? But, so smell, olfaction, olfactory nerve. The fancy name for taste is gustation. So, and when they say complementary senses, they're together. There are a lot of people during COVID, in the initial COVID outbreak, that lost those senses. Some have not returned. A friend of mine, well, I actually saw him at the grocery store last night. I know he's been trying different things they recommend online, that homeopathic and remedies, not medication, to try to restore it. He lost a fair amount of, it hasn't come back, and we're talking, 5 years for that type of thing. So they come together because when your nose is clogged, you can't taste something. When you think what happens when you burn your tongue effectively, and all of a sudden, it will impact your sense of smell. And fortunately, even Alan, it's a good takeoff point. When we burn our tongue or overexpose our tongue to either thermal sensors or other taste sensors, fortunately the little nerve endings regenerate. And you'll see when we talk about the eye, those regenerate as well. That was, remember, I showed you the rods and the cones. Those little tips, once they're exposed, they fragment and rebuild them. And so that's similar to what happens with when overexposure, like you're close to a fire and you can burn almost like the little nose hairs, and it will impact sense of smell and taste. We all have experience with that. The pizza, that one. Pizza is important. So what makes these similar is they have to dissolve in a fluid. These chemicals, they have to effectively be ionized, and because of that, the solutions are either mucus in the nose or saliva in the mouth. So the chemicals will dissolve, and it's the same for both. Taste receptors, that's why you do them companion. The olfactory epithelium, okay, roof of the nasal cavity, okay, and again, you're going to see very, very similar anatomy. The things that we always see that make what I like to say makes, we used to call them special senses. What makes them special is it's consecutive transduction. So here you're getting a chemical sense by the olfactory cells. If you might remember, you talking about bipolar cells with the eye. Basically, they're taking that one signal and converting it to an electrical signal, and that's what's going to your brain. Photosensors, same way. Taste sensors, same way. There's always a bipolar cell, which is really what it's one kind of sensation changing into another. We're altering it so your brain can interpret it. So it's when we don't often see pure sensory cells in sequence. And then finally, the cell that brings it to your brain is more of a traditional cell. It's not really a sensory cell per se, those ganglionic cells. And obviously, we have supporting cells. And you see, because we have stem cells, they can replenish themselves. They have a lifespan and they replenish. So you remember this is the olfactory bulb. It sits on top of the cribriform plate. Separated, the two bulbs are separated by the crista galli, and you have really the nerves themselves going through those tiny openings called cribriform foramina. And then they go, and they're mostly in the upper and middle area. What gives the nose the anatomical depth are those conchae, superior, middle, and inferior. And the inferior ones they actually classify as a separate bone. Not a big deal. Okay, but it's all about, and the nasal cavity is bigger than you and I think. It's one of the larger cavities, comparatively speaking. Most of us just think of this. It's really not. It goes considerably deeper. And there's a lot of little cul-de-sacs for sinuses. You have that opening that goes to the eye, the lacrimal duct, and you have the world's biggest opening for the nasal cavity in here. Okay, that's the auditory tube, and that's the one that goes, that we'll see shortly, into the middle ear area. And that's the one that really plays a pivotal role in a lot of things, particularly for children with the classic otitis media or middle ear infections. Okay? So olfactory nerves and unusual bipolars, they talk about the anatomy, basically, uh, and olfactory cilia going out of the knob. And basically, these are just the anatomical structures. I don't get too involved with it. It's not a big deal. Basically, knowing that they're chemosensors is probably sufficient. Knowing that the things have to be dissolved in mucus or saliva, depending whether you're talking about taste. We call them odorants. And really, it's not just one. When we smell something, it's like, and same thing with taste. It's a lot of different ones coming together that tell us, oh, that was this, or that was that. I mean, a lot of times you might get things like with taste. Oh, that had too much salt on it. That, there are sensors that will tell you that. So these are non-myelinated axons. They are really the sensory portion of the first cranial nerve. They have stem cells that give neuritis neurons, so they're continuously replaced. That's the curious thing about COVID. Maybe it impacted those stem cells. I don't know. And so here you can see it without going crazy about the anatomy. It's the same thing. This is effectively a ganglionic cell. Here are the little sensor cells, and in between them is a bipolar cell. So and I'm not going to ask you anything more about that, the different names. We have hundreds, if not thousands, of odorants. This is old. I think they've identified now over the last 8 years that this number may be 10 times larger. We have a greater capacity than you think. Okay. And as you can see, it responds to different things that are there, different receptors. And that's where effectively our sense of smell is. Pain and temperature receptors are there as well. And we have, and again, this is the idea. When we use something that's very distinctive, that's where smelling salts come from. And traditionally, smelling salts are spirits of ammonia, very highly concentrated ammonia. And it's in one of those little crackable ampules. You snap it, and it's like, ooh. Yeah. And I've seen people try to use that for staying awake in certain things. It's different. And so, and there's a lot of different strong senses. It's got to be smell, gaseous state. And so the odorant then dissolves into the fluid, the mucus or variation of that. And these are all, and we'll get into the physiology. We do physiology. It goes through the typical G protein receptors. Well, I'm not going to spend any time on. That's more in the physiology. So we'll revisit it when we do physiology. And so anatomically, once it comes from those nerves that are in the cribriform plate, they go in, they synapse what they call mitral cells in the olfactory bulb, and then voila, on your way back, you can see they amplify, refine, and relay it. And basically, this is the one that gets transmitted to the brain. So when I'm buzzing through that, there's not a lot that you have to know about it. So I don't know that necessarily this is something that's going to be emphasized on a test. And it's not on this test, and I'll let you know. It's on the next one. And the smell is consciously interpreted, frontal lobe. Some go through the thalamus. And again, what's interesting about this, smell is part of the limbic system. By definition, the olfactory element, smells trigger emotional responses. And this is the analogy I use. I'm the world's worst parent. For whatever reason, my kids still love me. Don't know why. When the little kids are, I got to throw up. And my first wife was the same way. Anytime I smell somebody puking, I'm like, I'm dying. It's like, here's a plastic bag. Tell me when you're done. That was us as parents, doctor and a nurse. We could have fecal material all over the place and deal with it. I was going to use another word, but I chose not to. That we could handle. Blood? Sure, not a problem. I'm bleeding all over. Oh my God. It's like, yeah, just a little blood gets in the way. But if they start to, that's a smell. And by the same token, certain smells attract us. Again, I'm thinking Oakmont, I'm thinking bakery. Evidence. The guy who services my car is in Oakmont. That's where I bought it. Any excuse. It's making a noise. Good. So, and then they call, if you can't smell, they call them anosmias, head injuries, early sign of Alzheimer's. Interesting. Various diseases. These are seizure disorders, which we talked about a little bit. A lot of times you'll get olfactory hallucinations, a funny sense of smell, and all of a sudden, that's a little warning sign. So they get visual auras, they get smell auras, that give them that little moment to sort of get down to something soft before it hits, that are there. Taste, there's anatomically, you can go crazy. In graduate levels and medical school levels, you have to learn all about fungiform, valate, circumvallate, foliate, all the different kinds of these things. There are thousands, as you can see, of taste buds on the tongue, and they sort of like little pegs that stick out. So you see them, it's almost, we call them a pseudo cilia. Remember, cilia are those appendages that stick out of cells, like pseudostratified ciliated columnar epithelia and respiratory tract. These look like them, but they're not. They're really projections of cell membrane that have little receptors deep inside. And that's where different tastes sort of come to the party. That's what taste buds look like. So I'm not going to ask you the difference between, and that's really the anatomy, fungiform, foliate, and valate. And you can see the different areas of the tongue have different structures that are there. So each taste bud has these flask-shaped epithelial cells, and those really, they call them gustatory hairs, is really the fancy name. And really it's more of a microvilli. And then there's pores along it that are bathed in saliva. And it depends on, and we'll get into the neurotransmitters. This is much more about physiology than anatomy. And again, they have a stem cell. So even if you really, something really burns inside that you were unexpecting, you're going to reach over 7 to 10 days, with very rare exceptions. It's going to come back. And knowing this is how a lot of these things, that's why you tell people not to panic and blah, 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 blah. So valate, there's sort of, I mean, you sort of get a fungiform kind of looks like a mushroom cap, okay? And so valate, they're a little more circumferential. And here's what I mean. This is this little cleft, and these are actually the true taste buds, the little sensors that are there. Then if you look closely, and here's the micrograph of it, this is what I mean. These so-called gustatory hairs are really sort of unique or modified. They look either like cilia, or they look a little bit like microvilli. And then these little openings are where different are adapted to different kinds of tastes. This is, you should know all these anyway. Sweet, sour, salt, bitter are the big four. Really, most of these and most of your taste, particularly sweet and salt, is on the anterior 2/3 of your tongue. And so when you're from, and this is my perspective, a culinary perspective, we do all of these things. You want to have things that are, you want to mix sweet, sour, bitter, salty. You want to be, it's like if you get a piece of fish and you want, what do they ever, and we serve with it? A lemon wedge. So that little hint of acidity brightens, you're perking up that. You've got to make sure that the salt levels are correct. Maybe you're going to put something sweet. We use agrodolces all the time, sweet and sour. Standard salad dressings are all sweet and sour. A lot of types of sauces have a sweet and sour component. Bitter is sometimes included, so you're trying to get all of those. And the most famous is umami, and you learned about that. Did you do your, was this amino acid day? That was glutamates. So umami, famously, when you went to have Asian cuisine, the big problem, people would come home and they'd have a headache and they felt lousy because they used a lot of MSG, monosodium glutamate, because it was a flavor enhancer. It triggered those things. And you could buy it in the grocery stores. Maybe you still can. You can certainly buy it online. It's what's called accent. And you sprinkle it on meatloaf. You sprinkle it on a casserole. You sprinkle it on chicken. And what you were doing is banging up the flavor component. The trouble is a lot of people, those glutamates give them headaches. Because they're basically they're an excitatory neurotransmitter. Some people don't do well with them. I never really had a problem with them, but a lot of places when you go out to, and we like it, like Panda Express. And there's MSG. If you go to an upscale or a better Asian, rather than just like a fast food place, you'll say, oh, no MSG. And I'll make sure they don't put it in because they're cognizant about that. So how do we do it in cooking? And glutamic acid and aspartic acid are the big players. Okay, there's different things that have it. For instance, soy will bump it up. A lot of different mushrooms will bump it up that are there. Worcestershire sauce, which is made from anchovies, that bumps it up. And if you're like me, we cook a lot of Thai cuisine. One of the key ingredients in Thai cuisine is fish sauce, which is made from anchovies and other things. It's like a bunch of fish remains that they ferment things in. It's rather pungent and salty, but it's like when you add a little drop of that, you see when you're going, what was that? You know, there's little things that you get cooking wise, we call flavor weapons in the culinary industry. Bam! Get into that kitchen and have some fun. You're all looking at me. The only thing that got your attention was Panda Express. And it's good. So that's umami. And interestingly enough, some people, they love fatty things. I don't have that. It's like people who love chicken skin, stuff like that. I mean, I'm more concerned about my cardiovascular status. And I don't know that necessarily it's that adverse, but I don't tend to eat it. I have a dog at home who is fascinated by this. Okay, and my wife likes it too, but her figure is considerably better than mine. So a lot of times about these, and again, sour and bitter protects you against bad stuff. And that's really good, dissolved in saliva and things like that. We're not quite done yet. Okay. The other thing, a lot of people have a taste for hot foods. To me, I like things that are kicked up. But I mean, you go to one of those restaurants and say on a scale of 1 to 10, I'm a 1. I have a stepson who taught physics here for a few years ago, for a couple of years. He goes for 10. Some people, it's just boom. My 5-year-old grandson is putting chili flakes on just about everything. He must have that thing. I'm like, it's like, hey. My son goes, don't worry. He loves it. And I know people, maybe you know people like that. They put hot sauce on everything because they're trying to stimulate that. And there's different ways. There's taste buds all the way down in your epiglottis. And in cooking, it's like we do that and the taste buds for the epiglottis, we do that because it kind of has like a finish. So certain kinds of, like chipotle peppers, you get it more in the back of your. So that's where the mixtures come from, the culinary. And so you could, and they adapt pretty quickly, as you can see there. I mean, I'm not going to go into all the physiology again. G's, pathways, which you should remember, anterior 2/3 of the tongue, because this kind of stuff is on the exam you're taking next week. We have a lot of missed calls today. Facial nerve, glossopharyngeal. So this should be a Roman numeral 9, not 10. That's a misprint. Facial nerve, anterior 2/3. Here's posterior 1/3. The vagus, epiglottis, and sort of feeling lower in your throat. That's where you see taste there. And so all of that are part of it. They want me. Hold on. It's my wife with regard to her. So all of these types of things, and again, being multiple nerves, it's hard to lose your taste. All these things are pretty self-explanatory. They're talking about zinc being used for radiation-related cancer treatment, and I did not know that. And that really covers all of that for us, which leaves us with the ear anatomically to look at today. And I guess we'll save the, I guess we'll have to say the structure of the ear. We'll save the cardiac unit and probably get that started on Friday, I would think. This will probably get done. So this anatomy is also this is more the anatomical part. When we start looking at physiology of sight and hearing, I do those. I spend just a relatively little time on taste and on smell. So extraordinary range of sound, okay? And at the same time, balance is also from the same mechanisms in the same location, although they're structurally different. There's a lot of similarities. And what it does is it involves effectively movement or physical changes that basically we are able to interpret as either sound or head motions. And so a lot of times they're intertwined. It's interesting along those lines. So for our purposes now, we're not going to do the physiology. We'll come back and revisit that relatively early on in the physiology part of the program next term. And what happens, you have the outer ear. There's nothing really to say about that. For lack of a term, it's like capturing sound. Not much. It's like you see in the old movies where somebody would have like looks like a horn and they hold it out there to capture sound. You ever see those? You see all those kinds of, effectively that's what you're doing. It's just the surface area captures sound. It basically is able to capture the sound and direct it towards your eardrum and make the eardrum vibrate. So it's physical deformation. It's a mechanical sensor. And that mechanical sensor, the sound is then concentrated by a series of 3 bones in that area called the hammer, anvil, and stirrups. The names you need to know are malleus, incus, and stapes, which means hammer, anvil, and stirrups, towards something called the oval window. And the oval window will then basically transmit those vibrations and send it along its path toward your hearing apparatus known as the cochlea. On the other hand, the mechanical changes that are associated with rapid or slow or head movements or positional things are captured in the same area, except those motions are basically taken to something called the semicircular canals. And the best analogy for a semicircular canal, again, is a carpenter's level. So that's really what you're looking at. You're having the ability to sense changes in 3 different planes. And it's a very interesting area that I don't understand nearly as well as I would like to. Receptors for hearing and balance respond to separate stimuli but are activated independently. So the outer ear, start with the ear. The outer ear, the auricle, structure, funnels, basically, it's a good word, funnels the sound. Don't care about the names helix or lobule. Earrings, I don't think play a role in that at all, as far as I know. External jewelry, that's external acoustic meatus. That is the structure in the temporal bone that is covered by the tympanic membrane or eardrum. And that eardrum is the dividing line between outer ear and middle ear. So the meatus implies a tunnel lined with skin-bearing hairs, sebaceous glands, and earwax is called cerumen or cerumen, I beg your pardon. I don't really get into that too much. Even in dermatology, it's not a big deal. We think it's kind of a modified apocrine gland, sort of like glands in the inguinal and the axillary area that develop at puberty. I know some people are troubled by that and they have to get earwax removed or use looser. Some people make more than others. And that basically is how it transmits sound waves to the eardrum, which is the cover, so to speak, on that. And so the membrane itself is the boundary, as I said. It's a translucent connective tissue membrane to drumhead. Nothing else. the big problem when somebody has an ear infection is fluid collects inside the middle ear because it's a drainage channel and gets blocked. That's that auditory tube. Why do little kids have it more commonly than why by roughly age 2 to 4? From maybe I'm thinking my daughter, from 9 months to roughly between age 2 and 4, we see a lot of kids are very, very prone to ear infections. Do you know the anatomical reason why? Anybody? I mean, because this is part of the program. Okay, we see it more in respiratory. That's really where I talk about it. But just to give you, we'll give it to you again. When babies are born, that eustachian tube or pharyngotympanic tube or auditory tube, all same name, is pointed more vertical. As the baby enlarges, as their head enlarges, as their face enlarges, effectively the tube becomes more like this. It begins more angled downward. So it's almost starting horizontal. Think of when a baby's sleeping and they get a little cold or a virus or even a bacterial infection. They sleep on their back this way. It goes directly in, almost directly to that middle ear. When you and I sleep that way, it drips down the back of your throat. We call it a postnasal drip. You kind of wake up with that kind of thing. Same deal. That's why roughly after age 4, it changes. And really, that's why the treatment typically, if you have, and whatever the numbers are, they change. Okay, the numbers are if you have so many infections with, in a calendar year or whatever, that's when the ear, nose, and throat people pediatrically start talking about what? What do they put in the ear? Tubes, exactly. Okay. Lancing, that structure is called a myringotomy. So mirroring must be the prefix for eardrum, and otomy means cut a hole in it. And then you insert, basically it's a cannula. Cannula is a rubber-ish tube that's got an open channel in the middle of it, and on the outside it's got like a little cap, like a mushroom cap. So all they do is make a stab incision in the eardrum. It takes about 5 minutes each ear. Boom, boom. License to print money. And boom, boom. Stick the guy in there, the little rubber tube with the opening, and the mushroom cap keeps it from going inside. And what happens, the connective tissue will heal with a teeny tiny bit of scar tissue. And as it does that, it'll push the tube out. And a lot of times what will happen is when you're giving the kid a bath, sometimes it'll disappear. A lot of times you'll find drainage on the pillow. And if you kind of put your finger on the drainage, you can kind of feel, or if you're doing the laundry, you can feel like a little rubber. My daughter had 2 sets. I don't know what happened to the tubes. But it's significant if you find the tube. Why's that? What would you do with the tube if you found it? You're really not very creative. You put it under the pillow. Tube fairy. Right? You don't? I bet you don't believe in the tooth fairy either. You're terrible. You're the kind of people who go to when they do the play or the musical Peter Pan at the high school, and they go, "Oh, Tinkerbell, do you believe in fairies?" You're all sitting there going, clap your hands. That's what I'm sitting around. You're awful. You wouldn't do that. You'd be, get up, Tinkerbell, get up. I'm trying to inject a little humor. You would do that. Good for you. Oh, wonderful music in that show. Did you ever see the movie with Johnny Depp and Kate Winslet, Finding Neverland? It's from about 70. It's great. It's great. I mean, she's his muse, even though he's married to another lady. And that's really where the Peter Pan characters emanated from. And it's very similar to the play that he wrote, that J.M. Barrie wrote. It hasn't changed a whole lot over the years. And it's a brilliant musical, a brilliant musical. Originally, it was always a woman, Typically, the role always goes to a woman to play the male Peter Pan character, and the man and Captain Hook is such a brilliant role. So Mary Martin made that on Broadway. Whose son was Larry Hagman, who was very famous for doing a show called Dallas, and also I Dream of Jeannie. And interestingly, the actor who made that role was a British actor for Captain Hook named Cyril Richard. Okay, and it was a very proper kind of British actor, but he had a wonderful sort of engaging way of doing that role. It's the theater, everybody. It's okay. I'm old. If I said Leslie Bricusse and Anthony Neely, would that have a meaning? You ever watch Willy Wonka? Candyman? They wrote that. They wrote a lot of the music for those. So it's a brilliant writing team. Bricusse, I think, is still around. Anthony Neely died a little bit younger. Okay, so this is the tympanic membrane. And so when it fills with fluid, there's a problem. It's a very good illustration. So it's, again, a drum head. If there's too much fluid, it becomes irritated and inflamed. You look in with an otoscope and you squeeze a little, it's like an atomizer, like a little thing that my mom used to have in perfume. And, you had the perfume, you could, we didn't have a little too much for those things. And she squeezed it on, and this blows air. It's right on the otoscope, and it's a different head if you want to use an ophthalmoscope. And it blows it, and you should normally see an eardrum vibrate. When it doesn't vibrate, that's usually an indicator, and typically it hurts quite a bit. And when we begin to see an ear that's inflamed like that. Here's the hammer, anvil, and stirrups, incus, malleus, and stapes. And here you can see this is the oval window. The pressure wave comes in, goes in the direction here or in the direction there, and when it comes out, it exits by something below it called the round window. So we have to find a way to dissipate the pressure. Here you can see the declination on the auditory eustachian or phryngiotympanic tube. And the problem is when that gets clogged or inflamed. And again, some people are more prone to it than others. I mean, it's kind of like some people can dive and do scuba diving, and some people are bad, they can't clear their ears. I'm bad on planes. I got to chew constantly. My ears always get clogged. Spray my nose, use decongestants. My first wife could scuba dive. She could pop her ears. I can't do that. So here's the middle ear. Air-filled, mucosa-lined, eardrum, and then that bony wall, oval and round windows or membranes. There's a little recess. That's fine. The mastoid, okay, behind here, again, that's the amplifier. Same illustration. And so here you can, formerly called eustachian, typically flattened but can be opened by a variety of things to externalize the pressure. That's what I mean about diving and clear your ears. Some folks can do that. I mean, it's one of the things that it's almost like a disqualifier. If somebody wants to go into special forces, they typically have to be able to do that fairly easily. Because the SEALs used to be called UDT, underwater demolition teams. Tympanic membrane cannot vibrate if pressure is not equal and sounds are distorted. Malleus, incus, malleus is on the eardrum, incus the anvil, stapes the stirrup, oval window, synovial joints, okay? Ligaments are there. These are the two. They're called tensor tympani and stapedius. Names going forward, not for this exam, but you probably should remember. And they are basically when we have loud sounds. You go to a concert and it's loud. They'll adjust the tension so that you can have auditory adaptation. They work pretty well, but if you're exposed to more than 90 decibels for sustained periods of time, that's when those things start to get damaged. And that's where people, particularly in the old days, rock music, they were on stage, had giant amplifiers, they didn't have ear protection. And a lot of old rockers, most notably, they just did ostensibly their last concert, they never retired. Pete Townsend of The Who had to have cochlear implants put in early on, lost his hearing. there have been a lot of them. I think Eric Clapton, I think, also had similar problems. Because back in the old days, those amplifiers were unreal. We got stage side seats for a group at a high school that had a #1 hit called The Association back in like 68, 69. Oh my God. My friend said, I'm going to get you great seats right in front of the amplifier. Oh, God. Good concert. So media, middle ear inflammation, children, shorter and more horizontal, frequent cause of hearing loss if it's not treated. And you can rupture an eardrum, it will scar. So, and typically you start with oral antibiotics and then you transition, if necessary, to tubes. The oral antibiotics, the use of amoxicillin, assuming someone's not penicillin allergic, and all that research was done here in Pittsburgh at Eye and Ear. You didn't know that. Because the two most common culprits are you will have micro. Do you have micro? Streptococcus pneumonia and Haemophilus influenza, which are normal flora for a lot of people. So you didn't get any of the clinical stuff in micro, did you? No. So, and then we go into structures, and I'll save the internal ear for next time because I don't want to give it short shift. And then we're done with that and getting into this area, and so we'll cover that, let's say Friday, and I'll introduce the heart, and we'll go full bore into the heart on Monday. Alrighty, thank you. Call it a night.